All right, so we're going to talk about the latest updates, whatever updates there are in this whole Deshaun Watson situation. And I'm going to be honest with you. I would not be mad that by the time this video gets uploaded, or at least by 24 hours, that this video is outdated because more news has dropped, more definitive actual news has dropped. There's been a lot of reports, a lot of leaks, a lot of conversation and speculation around this whole situation. Nothing definitive, obviously, from the NFL. When that does happen, we'll obviously drop a video at that exact moment. But just to walk everybody through, people who have not been following this through day to day, which, I would recommend not doing, following through day to day, because it's very, very unsatisfying to do so. But, clump up a bunch of weeks of news about this whole situation, and kind of give people the latest on this whole Deshaun Watson situation. That's about 5 p.m. on Thursday. So Deshaun's suspension, they had the arbitrary hearing. And if you don't know, what the NFLPA and the NFL have agreed to in the last collective bargaining agreement is that the first suspension ruling will be, when it comes to a situation like this, will be decided upon, or at least recommended by, a outside arbitrator who is Judge Sue L. Robinson, former federal district court judge. So she is going to say what her recommendation for suspension is. It is up to the NFL if they want to take that in or not. Now, some people have this ideal of, hey, why would the NFL take the recommendation of Sue L. Robinson and not just do whatever they want? It's a fair question, right? Because in the CBA, Roger Goodell does technically have final say. But there's a lot of other factors that go into making a decision about this, given that this is the first case under the new CBA in this new process, the new arbitrator process that the NFL has worked on, right? All the other suspensions are either PED, drug suspensions, or betting suspensions, which weren't covered under the personal conduct policy. Those are under different policies. Now that this is like the first big case on the personal conduct policy, this is how it's going to be handled. And what Sue L. Robinson's job is to do on this is to look at what both sides have presented, look at the language in the CBA, and decide based off of the language in the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement between the players union and NFL. Between that language, between the cases presented from the NFL and the cases presented from Watson, what is a fair punishment to come to? Now, I know a lot of people go, oh, they don't have to worry about the arbitration, but there are a lot of reasons why a lot of companies decide in situations like this to go to an arbitrator. One, it gives them a level of degree away from whatever the punishment is ruled, whether it is deemed by the public to be too soft or too harsh. It gives them a level of separation, which the NFL desperately wants from these suspensions. Like going all the way back to Pac-Man Jones, this is something that the league embraced at that time, but as time has gone on, you've seen less players on the commissioner exempt list. You've seen the league take a less proactive role in these suspensions. And that's basically because every time they've had these suspensions taken to court, it gets ruled against, and it gets ruled in a way that makes the NFL's side of the CBA weaker in a legal perspective from what the actual law dictates what the CBA is allowed to do and not do. So the NFL does not want a lot of their cases going to the federal court for a federal court appeal. So they want a degree of separation there because it's not been helpful for the NFL from a PR standpoint. Every time an NFL player mess up, people think the NFL should like be the justice system in that case. Like the NFL wants a level of separation from the punishment, from all of this stuff. That's what Sue L. Robinson provides. Also, you don't want to get in a situation with the players union, right, where you gave them this process as a as a compensation in the CBA, and then you immediately act in bad faith to that process by completely throwing it out the first chance you get. That's going to make the negotiations for the next CBA, and look, they're always going to be hostile negotiations, but you don't want to make negotiations so hostile to the point to where the NFLPA feels like they have to prepare for a lockout. Nobody wants a lockout, right? No side of this wants a lockout, and they have to renegotiate these CBAs like every 4 or 5 years, whatever it is. So that is also something to consider. So yes, Roger Goodell could overrule the suspension recommendation for Sue Robinson. From all reports, I think the latest thing that we heard, and this is from SI, is this from SI? It was 2 to 8 games is what people think that the suspension would be. Take that with a grain of salt. 2 to 8 games is a tremendous range. I don't think there's really any true range, in my personal opinion, of what the suspension can be. But that's what's out there right now. That's what's been technically reported. I would take any leak or report in this situation with a massive, massive, massive grain of salt, because I don't think anybody really knows due to the private nature of this whole process. So that is kind of what's going on, right? They had the arbitration hearing. Sue Robinson has the briefs of both sides of the argument from both the NFL and Deshaun Watson's camp. It's notable to point out that the NFL reportedly only has 4 of these cases being brought up in this suspension hearing instead of the 22 or even the 5 that they were originally going to go with. So something happened there. But that is what is going on. It's from all accounts, it seems like this is not going well from the NFL's perspective. I don't think people have felt like the NFL has done a great job arguing their point. And that's what's, if you go to Josina Anderson's Twitter and see what she's tweeted about this situation, what she's heard about it, and even Mike Florio, it seems like that would be the case. Now, again, Roger Goodell does have final say. We'll see if he actually uses that, because that's not going to be as simple as him just waving a hand and doing it. There's going to be a lot of consequences to him overruling a federal court judge and making his own suspension, even though they had an arbitration process. That could strengthen the CBA's point. I mean, the Players Association's point of making this a more permanent and a less waivable process legally, because the NFLPA could argue that wasn't even legal. What Roger Goodell has done, it's not legal to have that in the contract. These kind of things have happened a lot to the NFL, which is why they don't want things going to court most often. So that is that whole thing. We'll see what happens. I know people are saying that the news could be out Friday, tomorrow. The news could be out before camp. Y'all know how I've been on whenever they're going to announce the suspension. I don't expect the suspension to be announced until September. I know that it could be announced in in August. It could be announced in July. I just know that the NFL has traditionally been incompetent on these things. The NFL has traditionally or at least the league office has traditionally dragged its feet on these kind of things, and that the NFL takes forever for these kind of things to come out. I wouldn't even be surprised if somehow Deshaun plays week 1 but gets suspended weeks 2 through whatever, right? Like, the NFL takes forever with these kind of things. We'll see what happens and when they announce it. I don't expect it anytime soon, but the sooner the better, to be honest, so we can know exactly what the Browns have to prepare for. But the NFL is not worried about the Browns preparing for whatever it is. Now, speaking of the Browns preparing for whatever it is, oh my goodness. I thought the day that they traded Baker Mayfield, we would stop hearing about what the Browns would do if Watson suspended. I thought that people would actually just accept that Jacoby Brissett would be the starting quarterback if Watson is suspended for an extended period of time. But no. We're still here. We're still talking about these things. So the first thing was the Jimmy Garoppolo one, right? And basically what was said was that the Browns had the Browns had talked internally about the possibility of adding Jimmy Garoppolo, but that was before they got Deshaun Watson. Once they got Deshaun Watson, there was no talk of Jimmy Garoppolo, which tells me Jimmy Garoppolo was more or less seen as if Baker is kicking and screaming, we can just replace him with Jimmy G, right? Like that to me seems like what they were thinking, or maybe I don't know how this would work out cap-wise. They're going to bring in Jimmy Garoppolo to compete with Baker Mayfield. I'm glad we don't live in that timeline. Like, I'll take whatever this season is to not be in that timeline. Jimmy Garoppolo and Baker Mayfield would just not be a fun way to spend the year. I'm famously not a big fan of Jimmy Garoppolo, for those of you who are new. So that is one thing. And then the Browns, I think they worked out Josh Rosen and AJ McCarron. I think people are making more of this than it is, and I don't think people are making a ton out of it, but people are acting like Josh Rosen and AJ McCarron might compete with Jacoby Brissett for the starting job or even be the backup if Watson is suspended and Jacoby Brissett is in there for an extended period of time. I don't even think it's that, to be honest with you. I think this is the Browns saying, hey, if it comes down at any point in the year, especially if Watson's not available to play, that we have to go to the third, technically fourth quarterback available to us. Let's make sure that we do some research on who could be available. And I think AJ McCarron could be available. And I think Josh Rosen could be available in those situations. And you would obviously, you could even have these guys stashed on the practice squad if you really wanted to. But I think this is more or less that. I don't even know if I would expect any of these guys to sign a contract with the Cleveland Browns anytime soon. I don't think this is what that was for. It could be for a camp arm. I don't even think it's that. I think it's similar to what they did with Nick Mullins, where they had, I forget the guy that they had. It was like the Patriots' old fourth string quarterback, but they had a younger guy in there as the third guy or fourth guy in camp. And they let that dude be the fourth guy during preseason. And then once the season started, they cut him, signed a veteran, Nick Mullins, that they were familiar with, and then kind of rolled with that as our emergency quarterback option. So I think that's what they're doing. Hey, they're just doing their due diligence that, hey, if Watson is suspended and Brissett gets hurt, and Josh Dobbs has to go out there, then who are we going to put behind him? Or do we like any of these guys enough that if Josh Dobbs had to go, or if Josh Dobbs was our starter, that we would feel more comfortable throwing them in to start over Josh Dobbs, and feel more comfortable with Josh Dobbs just being a backup no matter what? I think that's what it was. I don't even know if it's going to be a camp arm. I don't know that any of these guys are going to get signed. AJ McCarron is a big name just because of the Browns almost traded the Nick Chubb pick for him. And then Josh Rosen obviously was a huge first round pick back in the day and kind of busted out the NFL. So there's a reason why there's a lot of intrigue on him. But either way, I think this was more, hey, if we get the week 4, or let's say week 3 versus Pittsburgh, right? Let's say the Browns get to week 3, and in week 2, Jacoby Brissett gets hurt and Deshaun Watson's not available. We need somebody to come in real quick and back up Josh Dobbs on a short week. Okay, cool. We've done our research on Josh Rosen. We've done our research on AJ McCarron. We brought them in. You could decide which one of the two you would rather have. Sign them on quick notice because none of those guys are associated with any team right now. Or you could just keep them on the practice squad if you feel like that's fit. But I don't think this is any indication either way of what they would do because I don't even think these guys are going to sign with the team. We'll see if they sign with the team, but I don't think that's what that was for. I think this is more along the lines of what they did with Nick Mullins last year. But that's all the news about the quarterback position. Hopefully we get some more concrete news. But again, just to summarize for those of you guys who took all this information in, and I understand it's a lot. Watson's hearing is done with the league. The arbitration process is done with the league. The announcement could come at any time. The expectation, as Laz reported, is that the Browns expect, that people have reported that the suspension could be 2 to 8 games. Take that with a massive grain of salt. It could be a whole season still. I have no clue what that suspension is going to be. It will get announced, and it's expected that the suspension should be announced sometime soon. Again, my disclaimer on this. I personally do not believe the suspension is going to be announced within the next 2 weeks. I personally do not believe that the suspension range is super accurate because I don't think anybody knows. But that's what's out there. That's what's being said. That's what's being reported by credible enough sources when it comes to these things, that it's important that everybody knows this information. But I would also say take it with a grain of salt. But that's the latest on this whole Watson deal. Again, let's hope that we get some concrete information soon. But that's it. You guys have a great day. Have a good night.